What do you think? The story out of Cleveland, who made the disastrous move of trading for Deshaun Watson, giving him a fully guaranteed contract. They have no way out. They're in cap hell. And there's a lot of talk that Myles Garrett, who might be the greatest defensive end of his era, has demanded a trade. And there's an awful lot of people saying, get him, trade for him. Trade Nick Bosa to get him if you need to. Just get Myles Garrett. So where do you weigh in on Garrett, who's obviously, a spectacular athlete who looks like he's about 250 pounds, but he's really closer to 285, and he's just a menace. Should the Niners go after Myles Garrett? Is the price tag going to be too much? What do you think?
I mean, they got to find out if the price tag's too much, but they need to call and find out, and they need to go after Myles Garrett. Every team in the league needs Myles Garrett. Every team in the league needs a Hall of Fame defensive end in his prime. So, yeah. And what's interesting about this situation is he says he wants to go to a contender. Well, the Niners were in the Super Bowl about a year ago. I mean, it's debatable if they're still a contender, but they were there a year ago. And of all the teams that are quote-unquote contenders, they have the highest draft pick. So they could probably put together a competitive package. And look, it'd be better to get, the next Myles Garrett in the draft, but you're not going to get that player with the 11th pick. This is one of the best players of the last 10 years. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Yes, go get him.
The question is just like, if you get him, how long would you have him for? That's really my only question.
The rest of his career, extend him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You'd have to at least figure out what his agent is asking for extension-wise, right?
I bet he wants an extension right now, Larry. He has no guaranteed money left on his deal. I bet that's part of the reason he wants out of Cleveland.
I saw that as well. So $1.3 million is his base salary for 2025 with a $5 million roster bonus. $1.3 million base salary with a $5 million roster bonus for 26. Salary cap hits of $6.3 million for the acquiring team.
So he's made his cash already.
Yeah, he's all of the bonus, as you just stated there, all of his guaranteed money is done. And that's generally when guys say,
he only stands to make $6 million in cash this year, which is not a lot for him. So I'm sure he'd like a signing bonus and a new deal.
Now, the Browns are reiterating that they have no plans to trade Garrett, but that's just kind of what you do initially and until you realize, hey, I have no options here. I mean, Garrett's a Hall of Fame edge rusher, and he's in the prime of his career. So, and he's just an absolute monster. And if it took Nick, I was talking about this with Greg Papa today. He's like, what if you traded him for Nick Bosa? And I'm like thinking to myself, well, first of all, that would be very popular. I mean, that would be a very popular move for Cleveland, right? Because Nick Bosa was great at Ohio State, and they would probably love that. Greg was thinking that the Niners, because Nick Bosa is younger than Myles Garrett, might get Garrett and a pick. I was thinking maybe the other way, that because Garrett's better than Bosa, maybe it would be Bosa and a pick. But what do you think? I mean, would you trade Nick Bosa in a deal for Myles Garrett? And do you think the Niners would?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone agrees. Nick Bosa would agree that Myles Garrett's better than him. Trent Williams would say that Myles Garrett's better than him. Like, Nick Bosa is a top 5, 6 defensive end in the NFL. 7. Myles Garrett's number 1. He's definitely going his career could end today. He'd be going in the Hall of Fame. He's been a first-team All-Pro 4 times. Yeah, you got to make this trade. I mean, this feels a lot like, I don't know, something that would happen in the NBA, where a guy who shouldn't be available becomes available because he's been on a terrible team for a long time and he says he's had enough. And if you're a self-respecting team, you get in on this. Like, if Eddie DeBartolo were owning the Niners, would there be even a question if they were going to make a run at Myles Garrett? Absolutely not. I mean, they got Dion.
Yeah, I mean Eddie D would have turned over every stone. He would have absolutely. I mean, I'll say right now, he probably would have paid Spagnolo double the salary to leave Kansas City and come to the Niners as the defensive coordinator.
Do you think the Saints are waiting for him?
Do I think
if so, that's a great hire. If the Saints end up getting Spagnolo, I feel like deserves another chance. He's a great coach.
I don't understand, Grant, why the Raiders, if Spags is really out there, does he really want to leave? If the Raiders really wanted a veteran head coach, why wouldn't they hire Spags?
Because they couldn't pass up the opportunity to get Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly. Come on.
Well,
Jesus.
isn't Pete? I look at Pete Carroll as kind of like a couple years past his prime, where I think Spags is probably the preeminent coordinator in the sport right now, and
I would
he's in
think
there.
he
He's
is.
in your division, killing you if you're the Raiders. I mean, I'll say this:
He's the
I
main
don't.
reason I feel like picking the Chiefs. I mean, him.
Right, I know. No, I
Seriously.
know.
I mean,
And if
Kellen
you
Moore just can't match up.
you saw Chris Jones the other day. He's like, "Hey, man, if anybody wants to beat us, just letting us keep Spags is not the way to do it." Um,
God.
and yeah, I was thinking, why don't the 49ers try to go for Spags? But obviously they
I
got
think they
Saleh.
did try to go for Spags. To Kyle's credit, I think he tried to make him an offer he couldn't refuse, and the Chiefs instantly said, "Oh, nope, here's an extension." But
Right.
what would be interesting is if, okay, so my barber, Montclair Barbershop, shout out to Daniel, he thinks the Niners should fire Kyle Shanahan. I don't know where he gets these crazy ideas.
Okay.
I don't know who told him this, but he thinks the Niners should go get Spagnolo as their head coach. He kind of feels like a George Seifert type. Like if Andy Reid is this generation's Bill Walsh, Spagnolo feels like this generation's Seifert, and he could have a very dignified head coaching tenure in his late 50s, 60s.
I kind
I
of
don't know.
think
Maybe I'm wrong.
I think he could be like Belichick
Yeah.
in that if you get him with the right quarterback, and you could argue he's with the right quarterback now, he's just not the head coach. But if you gave I know I've brought Spag's name up a couple times, and people that I'm streaming with who don't know much about Spags just immediately, of course, I can tell because they're typing away, they start Googling him. And then all of a sudden I'll get this, he was 18-49 and with the Rams. Yeah, I get it. He didn't do well with the Rams.
With the Browns.
Right, exactly. Belichick with the Browns. That's always my counter is like, hey, just because it didn't work out one place doesn't mean that it won't work out another place. And also, heck, there is something to be said for you didn't know what the job entailed, then you learned a little bit more about the job, and then you were much better once you realized, the full scope of the thing. And maybe a guy like Spags from watching Reed, he's interviewing for jobs, so he must want to have a head coaching job. I've heard him say that he wants to be a head coach again. So maybe is he just waiting for Reed to finish up, and maybe is Reed going to hand him, the reins like Walsh handed it to Seifert and gave Seifert a Super Bowl win that he probably otherwise wouldn't have gotten?
Maybe he's just one of these guys who gets a lot of money to be a defensive coordinator, and he likes it. He's like, you know what? I don't have to be the head coach. I don't have to talk to the media every other day. I get to focus on X's and O's and play calling, and that's the thing I like the most. Is that maybe that's possible? Because really, when you're a head coach, you're really supposed to delegate that stuff and focus on all the things that are boring. Some people can do both of it, but not a lot, and not very many do it well. So I don't know. Maybe he just wants to be a coordinator. And maybe it's fun being on the Chiefs and winning a championship every year.
And you're right. Some guys don't want any part of that. They don't want to meet with the doctor. They don't want to meet with Corey Rush, the
Make
PR
the
guy.
schedule, talk to PR, talk to the media every other day. It's tedious.
Hey, Spags, it's time for your radio show. All those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. He may not want that. So that's one angle. Okay, so that's the first story of the day. Myles Garrett is out there, and I'll say this: Myles Garrett's spectacular. He's spectacular. He's better than Nick Bosa. I love Nick Bosa. He's better than Nick Bosa. He's bigger, stronger, faster, more dominant, harder to block. Look at the numbers. He's better. He's just better across the board than Nick Bosa. So I would consider trading Nick Bosa. I think I would rather trade guys that I would probably wind up cutting anyway, like Leonard Floyd, Yatir Gross-Matos, and I'd rather trade maybe a future, I'd rather maybe move more draft capital, trade those guys, keep Bosa, and have Bosa and Garrett. Because you know what, Grant? The more I watch Mahomes, the more I think the one Super Bowl where the defensive line bothered him a lot, he lost. And unless the Niners are going to be able to draft that player, they better trade for that player, because if they don't put pressure on Mahomes, they are never going to beat him.
And you got to realize that it's always an arms race in the NFL. And if the Niners don't get Myles Garrett, who's to say the Chiefs won't? Or who's to say the Commanders won't? Forget the Chiefs. The Niners aren't even really on that level right now. The Niners have to get back to the NFC Championship game. And Adam Peters is just there. He just lost with a team that's got more salary cap space and a cheaper, younger quarterback who may be a bigger draw in free agency. We don't know. So, you really if you just stand pat and say, you know what, we got to pay Purdy, we don't have the budget for Myles Garrett. Okay, are you comfortable with the Commanders having him? Is that something you want? I mean, are you comfortable with the Eagles potentially getting him? I mean, that could happen. So you gotta be active.
No, you're totally right. And here's the thing. We might as well do this right now. I was gonna wait until after the next thing, but
I think let's do it now.
Let's do Bet US. Here are the Bet US odds. So this is what we're talking about right here. These are the Myles Garrett next team if they're not the Browns odds. Dallas is the 3-1 favorite to get
because Jerry Jones, obviously.
Jerry Jones, and they're desperate, and it would be Micah Parsons off one end. I mean, Dallas's issue is not lack of pass rush, but whatever. They're 3-1. But then, as you mentioned, the Commanders 4-1, sitting right there.
And it would stand to reason that the Cleveland Browns would want to send him to the NFC.
Do you think they would? I think they would.
I would think so. If all things are equal, get him out of the AFC. You don't want to face him.
But you know what?
The Browns freaking care. Like, you're not going to the playoffs, but
that's what I was going to say. I would say, you know what? I think the Browns care more about the Browns, and
good point.
Like the Niners wouldn't want to send them to the NFC because the Niners are fashioning themselves as a playoff team. But a team like the Browns, who probably is going to take a 5-year siesta from the playoffs, maybe you just want the best haul you can get. But look, so you got Commanders at 4-1. What if he winds up on the same line with Chris Jones opposite Karlaftis?
I mean, you're never going to lose again.
Yeah, Kansas City's going to win 2 more rings after this year if they get Myles Garrett next to Karlaftis and Chris Jones. Mm-hmm. So you can't let that happen. Nope. You got the Raiders at 6-1, and they're the Niners right there at 7-1.
And then right after the Niners are the Eagles, of course. Yikes! And then the Bills and the Packers.
Exactly. And let's just be honest about this. Any of the top teams, forget New England, screw New England, but from 12-1 on up, if Detroit gets Myles Garrett, they probably get a ring. If Green Bay gets Myles Garrett, they probably get a ring. If Buffalo gets Myles Garrett, they probably get a ring. If Philly gets Myles Garrett, they probably get a ring. If the Niners get Myles Garrett, they got a great shot. And so does Kansas City, and so do the Commanders. Of these teams, the only teams that really have no shot, even with them, are the Raiders and the Cowboys. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Everybody else is going to basically really improve their chances of winning the Super Bowl if they get Myles Garrett.
Yeah, Myles Garrett's really going to change the balance of power in the NFL. And there's one other dark horse lurking out there, Max Crosby. He hasn't requested a trade, but it seems like he's kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudged his way to the trade block. It seems like it's pretty clear he wants out. I wonder if he'll get moved this offseason too, or if he'll be a little bit cheaper than Myles Garrett. It's going to be an interesting offseason.
The one thing I would say is Niner fans do not spend any time, even though Grant just threw that out there, don't spend any time dialing up potential.
Raiders and Niners will never trade with each other. Yeah, never going to happen.
No Crosby trades, just because unless Mark Davis is no longer on this earth, I think Mark Davis would rather literally, he
couldn't face his dad in heaven. He'd be like, "Sorry, Dad. I know you told me not to do that."
I think he'd be publicly, flogged, if he somehow dealt with the Raiders or dealt with the Niners. I just thought he doesn't want to.
Are they still a rivalry though? They're in Vegas.
No, there's no rivalry. It's just all in his mind. But I mean, he blocked
the Eagles are more of a rival than. Yeah.
He just doesn't want. He just doesn't like the Niners. He hates the Niners, and he, his claim is that the Niners were the reason that he probably had to leave Northern California. Blah blah blah.
All I want to say is, even if the Commanders don't get Garrett, they could get Max Crosby. Like, these teams that are contenders with cap space are going to be making very aggressive moves this offseason. Like the Rams, they may not get Myles Garrett, but they could go get T. Higgins. Like, these teams are going to get way better, and the Niners can't just say, you know what, we got Greenlaw. We got healthy. Like, that's not good enough. You lost twice to the Cardinals last year. You got to do something.
Your best defensive tackle was Hargrave. He's done. You don't have a guy opposite Bosa. To me, the 49ers have to rebuild this offseason, both the offensive line and the defensive line. I mean, it's just no doubt.